come here today mainly, especially with a new issue that has arisen regarding Bangor University, where the debate union had banned him. It's ironic, isn't it? But anyway, Jack, without Jack, I would say reform, and not just reform, like throughout all the other political parties on TikTok, possibly wouldn't have had the amount of followers that Nigel has. So what I need to do, I'm going to introduce Jack. We had a massive kerfuffle outside as well regarding all those protesters. I'm sure you guys had a fair share of it as well. But anyway, I'll stop rambling on now. I'll introduce Jack.
Thanks, Harrison. Thank you. So thank you for coming today. As Harrison sort of said, there was a plethora of protesters outside. A sort of beastly woman came up and violently hugged me, which wasn't great, but anyway. We'll carry on. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. I know it's a hassle and it's cold, and it was even snowing today. I'm told. I saw it on the flight here, so that's always pleasant. It's been an exciting week, not just for me, but politics in general. We've had a couple of big stories, and one of them has involved me, which is always very good. I just happen to sort of cause controversy everywhere I go, unfortunately for you, Harrison, and your organisational skills. But really what I want to talk about today are the three events that have really taken place in the news and why they sort of cohesively come together to explain why the establishment and the establishment consensus is failing and crumbling before our very eyes. And I started off this week, and on Monday I was in Birmingham for the Time for Reform rally, which was Reform's big Birmingham rally. There were over 2,000 people there, and Nigel was giving a big keynote speech. And the day started really with everyone thinking that Keir Starmer was going to resign. With the Peter Mandelson scandal, Labour MPs very unhappy, Morgan McSweeney being sacked. So we really thought the event was going to be derailed by the Prime Minister resigning live as we were about to start. Thankfully that didn't happen, but his position is still precarious. I don't think he will last the next couple of months. But the event went really well, everyone enjoyed, and in the evening I sort of went for dinner in Birmingham after a successful day. And I was scrolling Twitter, or X, and I saw a statement from the Bangor University Debating and Politics Society. And I'm reading and I'm reading and I'm reading, and I see my name. And it's only when I see my name that I realise it's actually about me. So it interrupted my dinner, and the statement essentially said that I and Sarah Pochin, who's one of our MPs for Runcorn and Helsby, myself and Sarah Pochin were racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, and hateful. Now, I'm none of those things. Sarah is none of those things. Clearly, the Bangor Debating and University Society thought that we were. And that is why they very rudely declined our ask to host an event. And how that event came about was essentially, I've been doing this tour, a New Dawn tour. So I've done 6 universities now. So I started with Durham, then I had York, in which I had 400 people come out and protest me. So Harrison, Edinburgh University aren't doing very well on that front, because there was only about 20 protesters as far as I could see. So I think next time we have to boost those numbers. But 400 people came out to protest and march against me at York. Then we had, in fact, wasn't Edinburgh next, Harrison? And then we had to cancel. We had three venues cancel. So that was unfortunate, hence why I'm back here today. Then we had Exeter, in which I have protesters chanting and calling me a racist, banging on the windows as I was giving my talk. Then I've had Cambridge, which was fun, and last week I had Lancaster, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and in my view was the best one so far. But I'm here today in Edinburgh, and this week has really been an eye-opening experience, really, in terms of university campuses and the free speech issue on university campuses. So a debating society refused to debate us, which for most people is clearly quite a shocking thing, actually. You know, you've got students who are supposed to be interested in debating and having a discussion and asking questions and hearing from different viewpoints. And they had an event that they were able to host with an elected member of parliament and someone who, you know, has influence in terms of Reform UK and what's going on there. And they declined. And for me, the Bangor University saga blew up unexpectedly, really, for me. So it was national news, regional news. We had Welsh politicians from all parties coming out from Reform side, condemning the Politics and Debating Society. Obviously from Plaid and Labour, they were obviously supportive and said that, well, it's not a free speech issue and it's not banning speakers because they were never invited in the first place. But the context is important. This is a university that receives taxpayer money. And if you are a state-funded university, the university administration has an obligation to allow speakers from all different viewpoints, especially from a viewpoint of Reform UK, which is topping the polls and has been for the last 200 polls. These are mainstream views. These are not particularly radical. These are not particularly fringe. These are views that millions of people agree with and vote for and express on a daily basis. And the Politics and Debating Society at Bangor have really embarrassed themselves this week, actually. The students on that committee have embarrassed themselves. Bangor University themselves, the administration at least, I had a meeting with the Vice-Chancellor earlier this week, they do not express that same viewpoint. They are politically neutral, but they agree with me that all political parties should be welcome. And so we have another call with them, myself and Sarah, next week, and we're hoping we can actually put on an event at Bangor University. But we've received huge amounts of support and a lot of criticism as well. But ultimately, it opened up a debate and a discussion about free speech on university campuses. And the national outrage that it caused was a good thing because it created conversation. So there is a free speech issue, not just on campuses, but also in the wider country. So the story, again, that was huge yesterday, following on from Bangor, was Jim Ratcliffe's comments, in which he said that immigrants had, quote, colonised Britain, and that the benefits bill was unaffordable. Now, he's very obviously right. He's very obviously right. And he is saying things that millions of people say over the dinner table, with their friends, with their family, in schools, in universities. Yet he was attacked. And he was attacked by our political establishment for saying obviously right things. You know, we've got 1 million people in this country who can't speak English. We've got over 1 million migrants in this country that claim universal credit. So he is right. And what happened is the political establishment and Keir Starmer and his Labour government called it offensive, called it wrong, and said that he should apologise. He's a private citizen. He can say and do what he wants. The Prime Minister should not be intimidating a private citizen to apologise, especially a citizen who has been hugely successful, is one of Britain's wealthiest entrepreneurs. He has every right to voice his opinion. And if he wants to say that immigrants have colonised Britain, he has every right to say that. So Keir and the Labour Party attacked him. Kemi was too busy sleeping. She has said nothing about Jim Ratcliffe. And we all know why she hasn't said anything about Jim Ratcliffe's comments. It's because the Conservative Party are responsible for that colonisation. More than 16 million people have come to Britain since 1997. The Conservative Party said consistently that they wanted to bring down immigration to tens of thousands a year. That never happened. People voted for that to happen, but the Conservative Party did not implement it. The Conservative Party lied about what they were going to do with immigration. They said they would reduce it. Instead, they opened our borders to millions and millions of people. And that is what Jim Ratcliffe is referring to. So Kemi's been asleep because she can't say anything on this issue. The Conservative Party can't say anything on the extreme levels of mass migration that we have experienced as a country, because they are responsible. So the only mainstream party that backed Jim Ratcliffe's comments, that backed his comments that many millions of people have expressed in their homes and with their friends and with their family, was Reform UK and was Nigel Farage. And that was the dividing line this week for me, which is that the political establishment still refused to recognise that immigration is a serious issue, and for many millions of people is the top issue in this country. And that really is the dividing line for me. And Jim Ratcliffe's comments were proven with the story this week of the 23-year-old Afghan migrant who abducted, sexually assaulted, and raped a 12-year-old girl. Now, this happened in Warwickshire. And Warwickshire police, instead of being transparent, instead of being open, instead of being honest with the people that pay their wages, they didn't inform their community that this man was an asylum seeker. They refused to tell the public the truth. Now, why did they refuse to tell the public the truth? Well, again, it goes back to that establishment consensus and that suppression of the consequences of their actions. The British political class have allowed more than 200,000 illegal migrants to cross the English Channel. And the consequences of that you've seen with this Afghan migrant this week. He's been convicted. So they don't want you to know the truth. They don't want you to know the reality of what's happening by allowing these people into our country. Now, of course, not every single illegal migrant is like the one that was convicted this week. The problem is that we are allowing unvetted, potentially dangerous, let's be honest, young men into our country. We have no idea who these people are. We have no idea their background. They shouldn't be here. They have no right to be here. And these three stories, for me, come together and really exemplify the establishment protecting, suppressing the true narrative, the true speech, and the true consequences that are facing our country. And they won't ever own up to it, because it means admitting that they have totally failed. So really why I'm doing this tour and speaking to you all today and speaking to students across the country, and why I'm doing the work that I am doing, is because my mission, and I hope it's yours over the next couple of years, is to totally smash the two parties. Labour and the Conservatives, they both need to die. They have fundamentally broken our country. They have not provided a prosperous future for any of the students in this room. Britain is becoming a worse and worse place to live every single day. And for me, that is the only thing that matters. And people are hugely, hugely angry. They're angry of what is being done to their country. They're angry at what is being done to their community. And that is really why you're seeing Reform UK have this huge meteoric rise in a very short space of time. You know, I remember when Reform UK was essentially 6 people. You know, I was one of them. So the party has grown enormously over the last year and a half, even. It's now at 270,000 members. It's now got 8 MPs. It's got over 900 councillors. And the coming elections in May, and not just the English county councils, but the Scottish and Wales parliaments as well, that is really the time when we will start to see the Conservative Party be reduced to a regional party. It will no longer be a national party. It's about to be wiped out in Wales. It's basically wiped out here. And in England, it will lose thousands of councillors. So it will be reduced to almost a zombie party. It'll sort of be like a corpse that gets reanimated every sort of election. But it won't form the next government. It can't form the next government. And you'll see with Labour, Keir Starmer is the most unpopular Prime Minister, I believe, in history. Because he has no vision for the country. He has no answers to the issues that we are facing. And the only party that is taking that anger and that is trying to be productive with it and actually change things in the country is Reform UK. So that's why my mission, and I hope it's yours as well, over the next couple of years, is to support and work and help Reform UK in any way that I can, and I would encourage you all to do the same, whether that's simply becoming a member, or standing as a council candidate, or even standing for Parliament, or going out and volunteering and putting leaflets through the door and canvassing. The onus is on all of us to try and save our country over the next couple of years. And that's really the message that I want to put across to you all today, which is the country is in your hands, so please come and help me save it. Thank you. So I think we're going to do some questions with Harrison, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So anybody that has a question, if you just go down to the microphone there, and you're free to ask whatever you want within reason.
So I've been sent a few questions I thought I'd ask you first. If it's okay with you, I'm just going to read them out.
Of course,
Just see. Yeah. Just bear with me 1 second. Okay, so the first question is, it says you've spoken about the consensus and how the establishment manages to narrate, or it manages narratives rather than reality. Looking at the event in the past week or so, does the consensus narrative feel genuinely fragile, or could things just go back to normal?
So there is always a risk that things could go back to normal, but I spoke about people's anger. People's anger has been growing for the past, I would say, more than a decade. You had that huge anger in 2016 with Brexit, and that anger never really went away. It sort of dissipated, and now it's sort of re-emerged in outfits like Reform UK, but also, for example, like the Green Party. You're seeing the growth of the Green Party over the last couple of months. Their membership has soared. And the reason why these insurgent parties are growing is that people are desperate for change. They were promised change in 2024 by the Labour Party, by Keir Starmer. And they didn't get that. And they're not going to get that. And so the people of Britain are looking to parties that will offer them genuine change. And those two parties are Reform UK and the Green Party. Of course, I think the Green Party's, the policies are mental. Open borders, basically let any illegal migrant come in, give them a house, give them, food, give them whatever they want. So for me, it's obviously Reform UK, but the fragility that you're talking about will only increase, and you will see events take place over the next couple of months. This Mandelson story is still going ahead. He's been called to testify at the US Congress today. So events will continue to happen, and the events will continue to outpace anything that the political class can do to stop it.
Yeah, very well answered. For the next question, someone in the sense saying often campus censorship is excused on the grounds of safety for students. Do you feel like the idea of safety has been weaponised against the public?
So I think the idea of safety has been weaponised against the public, definitely. You saw that during COVID. You know, you saw that during COVID when people were told that they couldn't go and see their dying grandmother in a nursing home under the guise of safety. You know, that was a totally cruel policy. And you've seen governments, you know, universities and governments justify guidance and policies and laws under the guise of safety. Now, for me, speaking on universities, I'm not saying anything that is insightful, I'm not saying anything that is hateful, I'm not saying anything that is personal towards individual students, and I am simply trying to come here with a message that I expressed in my speech, which is that the onus is on all of us to try and save the country that we love. And for me, that should be welcomed, and that should not be censored under the guise of safety, because nobody is at risk in this room. Let's be honest, nobody is at risk in this room. Nobody is at risk by listening to someone speak. And I think we should always highlight that.
Absolutely. And at the same time, we are a legal political party at the end of the day. So to have, like, regardless whether you disagree, let's say the Green Party were holding an event, you wouldn't go out of your way, spend your Friday evening protesting, hassling, even assaulting the guests.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a question here. It says, in your experience touring universities and speaking to students so far, are your hopes for the future better or worse than they were before? And what are your impressions of talking to the average undergraduate student?
So my average impression of talking to the average undergraduate student is very hopeful. You know, the people that I've been speaking to and meeting on this tour are worried about the country, but they're not worried from a place of you know, stagnation, or they're not worried from a place of not wanting or being able to do something. They are incredibly motivated to get involved. They're incredibly motivated to help. So it's why, you know, basically every talk I get pitched pitched a job role that somebody would like at Reform, or you know, to come and help on the tour, and that's always welcome. You know, part of the reason why I'm doing this tour is to meet talented students from across the country who will staff you know, the party in the future, or who will staff the next government of the future. Because you know, if you look at a Reform context, Reform are wanting to bring in political appointees for a lot of the higher level civil service. A lot of the students that I'm meeting, and a lot of the students across British universities, will be those political appointees. So we're looking for thousands of people that can come in and really help us with the mission. So my average experience has been incredibly positive. You know, of course we get the protests, and that's unfortunate, but they're perfectly entitled to do that. But the average experience of traveling around and meeting students across the country is always positive.
That's great. And would you also say there's a bit of a fear factor with students as well, just supporting Reform and maybe attending events, or just generally kind of having open experience from it? Because from people I've spoken to, there's so many out there who've like secretly told me in private that they support Reform, but they're so scared that they can't even, I guess, bring themselves out to say it. They won't even, let alone Reform, they won't even say they're a Tory supporter.
Yeah.
I think that just says a lot, especially kind of with how radically left universities have shifted in recent times. So what would kind of be your thoughts on that?
Well, they shouldn't say they're a Tory, Harrison, because they shouldn't be one. But what I would say, I'll tell you a story actually. When I went to York University, one of the students there was telling me how, when he set up the Reform Society in York, his dorm mates, they bought a block of cheese and they proceeded to melt it on his doorknob as a way to sort of, you know, bully him, essentially, and a way to you know, treat him in a horrible, sort of cruel, disrespectful way. Now that might seem, in the grand scheme of things, not a huge deal, but it's an indication and it's indicative of that fear factor that you've just spoke about. I do think that is real, and I do think, students don't want, if you're a student and you're just interested in learning about reform, you don't necessarily want to walk through a protest of 50 plus people. That's not a pleasant experience. That's not a pleasant experience to walk in and be shouted at and abused by the people outside, as happened to many people tonight and as happened to me tonight. That's not a pleasant experience. They're perfectly entitled to do that, but the students that perhaps are just interested in coming to speak don't want that experience, and I perfectly understand that, and that's partly why we live stream these events as well, so that people can watch it from the comfort of their bed or their sofa. So that fear factor is definitely real, and that's partly, again, why I'm trying to talk to sort of reduce that and encourage students to get out and say what they believe and support what they believe in.
Well, you've certainly inspired me.
Thank you.
Especially, I don't know if you guys are aware of this situation that happened, but in York they had about 400 protesters. To be honest, I don't know how the security there even managed to get you through and stuff. But anyway, I heard the event was successful regardless though.
Mm-hmm.
Alright, let's have a look, see what else someone said. Okay, so this is regarding the controversy of Bangor.
Mm-hmm.
It has raised a lot of questions over universities as institutions and the future of them. Some suggest that we won't have universities in their current form in 10 to 20 years. I know, especially hearing from some of reform's policies they're bringing out, they kind of want, I guess, to change, not completely destroy universities, but kind of change the systems there. So it's just wondering, what is your kind of thoughts on that?
Well, let's look at the university system. What you've got with many universities today is that they are essentially scamming students. They're not offering value for money. They're essentially visa factories for foreign students. So what you're seeing is that universities are not delivering on what they promised and what was promised to students by politicians. Tony Blair started the we want half of all students going on to university. What's happened with that is that the value of a degree has been degraded, and essentially now every job almost requires a degree. And so the graduate jobs that newly graduates are applying for are paying minimum wage. 25% of graduate jobs are paying minimum wage. That is not the future that was promised to people when they were told to go to university and work hard and get a degree. So the value of a degree has been degraded. The job market has been degraded as well, partly because of that. And what you've got is that you've got universities that are essentially acting as visa factories for 600,000 foreign students. It's the same foreign students that are competing for graduate jobs when they graduate with domestic students here. And the issue with the university system is that, number one, there are far too many. There are simply far too many universities. 50% of students should not be going on to university. Most people don't need a degree. But also what you've seen is that we've lost the sort of meritocratic element which empowered Britain, almost a century ago. We've become a really credentialized society in which it's simply, if you have a piece of paper, well, then suddenly you're qualified. And the rise of using AI to filter out and filter job applications hasn't been helpful with that either. So for me, over the next 10, 20 years, how the university system changes is there's less of them. Far fewer people go to university, and you obviously reduce the number of foreign students dramatically. And yes, some universities may not survive that, but in the long run, the country and students will benefit.
And would you say as well, from universities, especially post-Blair, that has kind of increased the demand for more migrants, whether they're legal or illegal, to fill those labour jobs generally? Because there's a lot of points as well, like what the left argue about, saying, oh, we need immigration at this rate to fill in all the NHS jobs, all the building jobs, but none of those those jobs really need full university. My mother, she works in the NHS. She never even needed a university degree. I think she did biology A-level, and that was pretty much the requirement. You then get training after that. So do you think we should shift back more towards that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where, if the number of universities places reduce, that is definitely a place where you'll see things going. You know, you will have companies that will have their own training programs. So if you finish school at 18, you know, there's no reason why you know, huge companies and even small companies can have their own sort of training programs that will last 2-3 years and that will sort of guarantee a well-paying job. The problem with universities now is that they cannot guarantee that. They can lie, and politicians can lie, but universities cannot guarantee a well-paying job anymore for most graduates. Even if you look at, you know, the elite universities like Oxford and Cambridge, many of their students cannot get jobs after they graduate because there simply isn't enough, or the skills that they've gained, the qualifications that they've gained, the degree that they've gained, isn't helpful in the job market. So students are putting themselves in tens of thousands of pounds of future debt, which is taken out of their taxes every month. That's even when they're on minimum wage. You know, new graduates now pay off their student loan on minimum wage. Again, that is not the future that was promised students.
I just want to get through some of these questions, just because there's a few people wanting to ask. If you were to give one piece of advice to the average university students which are starting in their first year, what would that be?
Well, you made the right decision. As much as I've disparaged universities, in the system that we currently have, you have to go to university. You have to have a degree, especially if you are particularly ambitious, if you're wanting a job in politics, if you're wanting a job in government, in the civil service, at high sort of elite levels in companies, you need a degree. So what I would say to new students starting is, you've made that first correct decision, and I wouldn't rely on the degree getting you the whole way. It's all about experiences and who you meet. Who you meet is so important. And it's all about widening that network that you have from a young age, and speaking to people that you find interesting. It's speaking to people that you want to get to know. It's coming to events like this. You know, many students have pitched me, as I said earlier, for jobs and you know, internships, and I'm obviously happy to help out as long as I can, and as long as it's suitable. Get out and grab your own opportunities is always my advice.
So here's one of my questions I want to ask you. This might be slightly tense because it's a bit controversial.
Okay.
Regarding past comments, in terms of, I guess you mentioned about in World War II, in hindsight, if Britain shouldn't have gotten involved, they should have either stayed neutral or not done anything. What would you say you kind of stand by those comments, or was there context behind that was kind of twisted by the media? Could you just elaborate on what those comments really meant?
Well, like most things involving me and involving reform, it was twisted by the media. What I wrote was that Britain was worse off for fighting that war, which is true. We were economically bankrupt, we'd lost hundreds of thousands of our best and brightest men, and as a country, the war almost finished us. And that was my argument. Of course we were right to defend Europe and fight against the Nazis. Of course we were. Nobody, including me, is arguing against that. My point was economically we were worse off. And that was really the point, and it's been twisted and misconstrued by The Guardian. It's just a wonderful publication. They wrote a very nice comment piece about me today, which was, always pleasant. So they're not my biggest fans, but they twisted the context of that article, and it's unfortunate that it's had the pickup that it has.
All right, so I think now is a good time just to take a few questions from the audience. Is any of you have any, you can raise your hand. I'm sure we'll get around to you at some point.
They have to go there.
So.
the microphone.
Yeah, just come to the microphone down there. You can all, just take turns. Perfect.
Thanks.
Just a little walk up. Hi, I'm Luke.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Is there any areas of policy for reform where you think it needs a bit of tweaking, or maybe it doesn't go far enough?
So in terms of policy for reform, it's interesting because as a new party, there isn't actually a huge amount of policy that is currently available because it's still being worked on. So for example, the Welsh Manifesto, the Scottish Manifesto are all being worked on at the minute. So in terms of where I think reform are lacking or where there needs to be a particular focus on, I couldn't comment on that now, but maybe ask me in 6 months' time.
Yeah, fair enough. It's just on the basis of, you've got to work with what you've got. For example, the policies that are online at the moment, the one that comes to mind for me, and this shows how much of a policy nerd I am, is on planning reform, and specifically the topic, because obviously Labour's been a massive letdown to any of the kind of urbanists who are kind of lefty, have been pushing on that. Massive letdown, obviously no growth whatsoever. But the reform plan is 30,000 brownfield sites they want to open up. I've run the numbers on it. It's not actually going to have that much impact on housing. We've got about 12 million housing backlog by my estimates. And 30,000 sites, even if you did manage to do them all in 1 year, wouldn't have too much impact. I know you're not really working with much, but is there any areas that, maybe not policy, but areas of conversation or direction that you would like more focus on, perhaps a bit more vaguely?
So I agree with you. I think there needs to be a huge house building program. I've spoken about this on the tour. You're right, that we've got a 12 million backlog. And I've always tried to frame that in the context of immigration. We've had extreme levels of immigration. That's obviously impacted on house price. It's obviously impacted on rent. There's a study that came out that basically said that if you live in London, your rent has increased by a couple £100 a month since 2000s, just purely through immigration. So these are huge amounts that it's costing people, and yes, it's increasing housing, and yes, it's increasing rental prices. But you are right, even if we reduced immigration to zero tomorrow, we still need new homes, and we have an interesting sort of stock of housing as well, which is some of the oldest. So it's about how you do that in a practical way, but it's also about how you do that and you don't concrete over the countryside, which I don't think anybody wants. And it's definitely an area which I'm interested in. I think partly how we fix it is that we build up in the cities. For example, there's no reason why there can't be a skyscraper on top of Clapham tube station, But you see my point. It's about densifying the city. Yes, I think we are going to have to build on Greenbelt. But I think how we do it has to be practical and careful and involve residents in the area. And actually we should make it as big as an effort as possible to protect the British countryside.
I'll do a very quick one more question, and whoever wants to kind of creep up behind me, please do so that I've got some pressure to stop talking. Obviously, a lot of reforms policies kind of balance each other out in a way. Obviously, there's going to be some impact on overall GDP, not that that's the only metric, of course, by some things. For example, cutting down on migration might affect the overall figures, might be a bit of a lag effect before increases to wages come in. There's going to be a bit of shift in the way that businesses run, etc. If there is a bit of turmoil in the effects of some policies, obviously that's going to be hit with a lot of difficult media coverage, and previous parties in the past, as we're seeing now, their first instinct is, someone says something bad about us, let me sharpen my knife, see if I can take out the leader, maybe that's the solution every 5 minutes. Are reform at the moment and going to be able to handle the pressure of the even more hostile media environment once they're in, and especially as media is your area of expertise? Is there actually even an opportunity or some methods we could use to not only weather a storm, but maybe control it and turn it back and kind of go through it? And
So in terms of media pressure, what you'll see is that the leader of the party, Nigel Farage, has been under, I think, more media pressure over the last 2 decades than anybody that, besides probably Donald Trump, actually. You know, he has received enormous pressure, enormous criticism, and almost a sort of vicious, cruel hatred by a lot of the journalists, media class. So I have no doubt that Nigel, as Prime Minister, would be able to weather huge media storms. He does it almost daily. You know, there are multiple examples of him doing it even recently. And what you find with Nigel is that he backs people that work with him and that are loyal to him. So, for example, when Harrison mentioned it earlier, when the Guardian published, the piece on me in the World War II context, there was never even any discussion that, it would affect, my working with the party and with Nigel. So he is very loyal to people that are loyal and trustworthy with him. So I've no doubt that he will be able to weather those storms. As for if there's things that we can do to mitigate that, I think you're seeing the party do that anyway with social media, which is essentially creating their own platforms. So, they're launching a podcast studio. And that might sound trivial to many people, but podcasting is huge. And if you can build a podcast that reaches 1 million people a week, that's 1 million people that are supporting you, that are hearing your narrative, that are hearing your messaging, and it completely bypasses the mainstream media. So it's about building your own alternative media channels, and that's really what you're seeing the party do.
Thank you. Now, please, someone else, take over.
I'm going to ask you a question, but I'm not going to put down the microphone. You said at the start, when you started talking, you said that Jim Ratcliffe has comments about us being colonised. He said a number of times that he was right with this.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Ratcliffe apologised to us today. And it's quite a stretch to say that he was right, because it's quite a hyperbolic statement to say that we've been colonised, What do you say of that?
What?
The subjectivity of what is right there, there's a question there,
Of course, well, everything is, comments like that are subjective. I just happen to think that he's right. What he apologised for was his language. He didn't necessarily apologise for...
Do you think that we've been colonised by immigrants?
I think that has been happening over the last 2 decades, yes.
A colonisation, you think that that's the right terminology to use?
Yes.
You do?
Yep.
But you don't think that's an exaggerated, considering the numbers? You said
Considering the numbers, 16 million people have come to this country since 1997, yes.
And how many have left the country since 1997?
You'd have to tell me the figures, I don't know.
Maybe you should know what those figures are if you're going to make these statements. You've got to say 16 million people have come into the country through immigration.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other factor is that this seems to be the only policy that you seem to talk about is immigration. It seems to be the only thing. You said a minute ago that house prices have risen in London because of immigration. Where is that fact from?
That's from a think tank called Onward, which you can read their study online.
What's the veracity of that? It does sound like a dubious statement to me. There's innumerable other factors.
It was a research study which you can find online.
By who?
Onward, I just told you.
And who are they?
They're a think tank in Westminster, I just told you that as well.
A think tank produced a study that said that house prices have risen primarily because of immigration. Do you think that's a widely accepted perspective?
I didn't say primarily, again, you're misquoting me. I said it's contributed to the rise in house prices.
Right, a couple of £100, that's what you said.
A couple of £100 a month, that adds up.
That's just it's a massive statement. It's a massive claim.
Well, feel free to read the study online. It's Onward, so you can find it on their website. Thank you.
Can I ask another question over that?
Not really, unless you want to come down to the microphone, then you can ask a question. Thank you, sir. Harrison, do we have any other people that want to ask a question?
Let me ask you
It's all right if I quickly answer his colonisation.
Listen, right, you've come into here, you've come to Edinburgh, right, you want to talk about these things in this city. I'm one of the few people probably from this town sitting in this room, right? So I'm going to ask you a question about this, right? Do you think that the association with reform in its current political ascendancy, do you think that there's an uncomfortable correlation between reform and an outpouring of racism, either via social media or generally
No. Next question. Thank you.
Do you think there's no association between
Yes, I think we've got a question for the lady. Thank you, sir.
You don't have to patronise me, sir. Do you think that there's a correlation?
I'm not patronising you.
You are trying to patronise you, can patronise you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm looking at this from a Scottish perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So SNP has broken Scotland, and I just wanted to know, what did you think the messaging should be for people going out and speaking, you know, on doorsteps and trying to be activists and promoting what reform stand for? But what should we be saying, perhaps in Scotland, about the messaging?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. For me, I think the messaging should be that if you want the SNP to have some type of effective opposition, then you should vote for Reform UK. You know, I think it would be you know, a huge win and a shocking win if Reform were to be the largest party in Scotland. I think it's probably quite doubtful. But what Reform can be is it can be that opposition in the Scottish Parliament to hold the SNP to account. And what the Scottish people that I've spoken to, for me, that's what they've told me is really lacking, and that the SNP can essentially get away with anything because they have no effective opposition. And it's, you know, the similar in Wales. You know, Wales have had, you know, 30 plus years of Labour rule. They've had no effective opposition. And Reform in Wales and Scotland can provide that. And obviously that's dependent on the candidates, on the leaders. You know, I think you've got two effective leaders, you know, Wales, Dan Thomas, and Scotland, Malcolm Moffat. I don't know if you've met him. You have, yeah, there you go. Yes, I think you've got two effective leadership candidates who will really take the fight to two parties that have been entirely complacent. And I think that is the message.
Because I think, just from my perspective from growing up in Scotland, I went to Edinburgh University a long time ago. However, I feel that I had to leave. I had to get a job in London. And I've lived elsewhere and I've come back home.
Yes.
And I just wish there were the opportunities to prosper in this country. And I feel like students are really being let down. I've got my cousin who's in St Andrews. I fear for her. I fear for her when she leaves, that she's going to have debt, she's not going to have opportunity, she's not going to have prosperity, she's not going to have the job that she deserves to have. And I feel this is the last chance that we have. Having Reform in Scotland gives people a chance to speak. And democratically, if you want to vote for them, perfect. If you don't have to. But it gives us a choice, and I think that's great. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and I think your story is right. You know, Dan Thomas in Wales says a similar thing, which is that he had to leave London to get a good job and to find that job opportunity. And he's finally, you know, come home, and he's trying now to build a better Wales and a greater Wales. And that's obviously what Reform want for Scotland. So are you standing by any chance? Good. Good. Well, I'm sure we'll chat after this. Thank you. Do you want to?
Yes. Is it all right if I just answer his question regarding colonisation?
Sure.
So I kind of live around the London area, and there are communities, especially kind of near the centre, where it is completely dominated by one single culture. And I think in a way that is kind of a colony, because you have just one group there. It's especially a good example of this is in Tower Hamlets, when you have signs out in Arabic just to appease the majority population over there.
What do you mean appease? What do you mean appease?
Well, because they can't speak the language, so they have to have signs in Arabic.
What do you mean they have to have signs in Arabic? There's signs in Arabic in Tower Hamlets to accommodate a certain demographic,
Yeah.
is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And this is,
Yeah, but don't you think?
And does that, and so is therefore, like, look, your man here can sit and dispute if he wants whether or not there's a correlation between the rise of Reform and the rise of overt racism within our social media, within our general culture. But that's just, anybody with a scintilla of intelligence knows that that's not true. Anybody with a scintilla of intelligence knows that these are directly correlated. No? So it's like, and if you're saying in Tower Hamlets, they have signs to accommodate a certain demographic because it's the dominant demographic in that area. This is maybe true, right? But what does that mean? What does that actually mean for the greater context of the system and society? We've had 30, 40 years
I
of
think this is the
decline
last comment that we take from him, and then
we've got
we
an
can start.
entirely bankrupt political culture. You've got Reform who are positing themselves as oppositional to the establishment. Laughable. You've got a merchant banker in Farage who's a professional careerist politician.
Is there a question, sir? Because otherwise we're just giving a speech.
Well, the fact of the matter is, you wanted to make a bunch of generalisations and a bunch of statements that are dubious.
Well, they're not dubious. I've given you the study that you can look into yourself. Thank you. I think we have another question. Thank you.
You mentioned earlier how the Conservatives and Labour had broken the country. How do you see Reform offering an alternative with so many former Conservative MPs like Lee Anderson, Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick? How is that offering reform if it's just the Tory MPs in a new party?
So I think that's a perfectly legitimate question. What I would say is that the MPs that have come over, so for example, Lee Anderson was the first, he was the Reform Party's first MP, and he really made a sacrifice actually, because there was no guarantee that he would win his seat in the 2024 election. Obviously he defected before then. So he really was the sort of outrider, and he received a lot of criticism and a lot of attacks from the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. And I think if you speak to Lee, he would say that he came home to Reform as a political party. He never felt at home in the Conservatives, and he never felt at home in Labour. As for the other MPs that you've mentioned, again, I think it's a perfectly valid concern. It's a concern that many of the members of Reform agree with, which is that we don't want to be Tory 2.0. But again, the onus is on all of us to get involved and make sure that that isn't a reality. We've got to find thousands and thousands of council candidates. We've got to find 650 parliamentary candidates. And ultimately, it's about who gets involved. So if the people getting involved are former Tories, or are former Labour, or are former Lib Dem, or even former Green, we've had some Green councillors defect, well then those are the people that will hold the positions. So the onus is on everyone in this room, everyone listening at home, and the members of our party to apply to stand, to get involved, to volunteer, so that the concern that you're raising doesn't happen.
But that sounds like it's more important for you to just gain the power rather than people that are actually standing behind the values. If you're saying, so moving from Green to Reform, that is a massive change. Either the person was lying about their beliefs when they were part of the Green Party, or they're lying now that they're part of Reform. Like, you can't change that much.
I think that's slightly unfair for councillors who are very much focused on local issues. And people do have political changes that happen over time, and they can change political affiliations and political allegiance. But in terms of parliamentary candidates, yes, I think it's important, obviously, to have the same values and agree with the same policies. And if you're defecting, Nigel is very clear and has been very clear, especially with the parliamentary candidates, that you are coming and joining a party and you are therefore backing those policies. And if you're not backing those policies, well, then you're not welcome.
Okay, and another question. So you're all about stopping the boats that come in from France. How do you intend to fully stop all boats? The boats will come from France. There won't be any control by the British government over that. What are you going to do with these people when they arrive? Like, you can't send them back through Brexit. You're not part of the Dublin Agreement anymore. What's the plan to do it with them?
So there are a couple of options that you can explore. The first is what Italy are trying to do, which is use their navy to blockade boats in the channel. The second, actually, I disagree with you. You can stop the crossings if you stop the incentive. So what is the incentive for illegal migrants to come across the channel? The incentive is they get a hotel spot, they get food, they get housing, they get a mobile phone, they get a SIM card. They get given all of these things that are incentives for them to cross the channel. So if you stop those, well, you can laugh, sir, but it's the truth. If you stop those incentives, you can stop those people coming across the channel. And as soon as you see people, as soon as illegal migrants see people being deported from Britain, as soon as they see that if you cross the channel, you have no chance of staying in Britain because you will be deported, which we can do. We can do it to Rwanda, for example, or we could do it to Albania, which is another option that was explored. If illegal migrants who are wanting to make that crossing see that when they reach Britain, they will not be allowed to stay, then you will see the crossings stop, sorry.
These people, I mean, a lot of them, they've fled war zones, fled prosecution. Like, they need a safe space to come. Do you not think it would be more, especially with the lack of people in our NHS, a large majority of people, large proportion of the people in the NHS working have come from abroad, and we're missing people. Should we not give these people a chance to come in and like take them in, give them the opportunity to work? Because at the moment they're not allowed to work, and then they're facing scrutiny as a result because they're not working.
Well, the people that you're talking about in the NHS, most of them came legally. You know, if you are crossing into this country illegally, you have already showed that you are willing to break our laws, that you are a criminal. If you are here illegally, you are a criminal in this country. And if you allow people to come in, grant them asylum, allow them to work, well then, as you said before, there is no chance of stopping those boats, and you're going to continue to get those illegal crossings. You're going to continue getting unvetted men, most of them are men, unvetted men into the country. We don't know who they are, we don't know their background, we don't necessarily know where they've come from. But also you talked about they're fleeing war and you know, other awful situations. Of course I have sympathy for that. But Britain is not the world's charity. We simply can't afford to do it. And so unfortunately, those men, and again, they are mostly men, are already in a safe country. They're in France. So they're not fleeing war in France.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't agree.
Thank you for the questions.
Hi Jack, thank you very much for coming this evening.
Thank you for
Really
coming.
enjoyed it. I'm at Newcastle Uni. I run the Conservative and Reform Society. We had Ben Habib a few weeks ago. And yeah, well, it's interesting because I mean, I managed to speak to him obviously a lot in the evening, and he's got Advance UK, and he's planning to put 650 candidates basically in every seat next election. It's going to be a big problem for Reform, as well as the Conservatives. They're gaining a bit of traction. I personally think he's a really good man. From when I spoke to him, you know, you've got Rupert Lowe with Restore Britain. That's more of a movement as opposed to a party. You've got Problems Reform, you know, echoing what the gentleman before said. I mean, I personally think they're the best vehicle at the moment, but becoming more part of the establishment. Looking at Advance UK, looking at Ben Habib, what's your best approach to addressing the problem there? Because a lot of people, I think, will vote for Advance UK next election.
So I don't think a lot of people will vote for Advance UK in the next election. I think if you are wanting a replacement of the current system, of the current order, then by the time of the next election, whether that is 2029 or even sooner, or even earlier, you will find that voters will back Reform UK as the only right-wing alternative. Ben Habib, I've never met the man, I've never spoken to the man. He was sort of before my time, really. One thing I have identified about him is that he is very personality driven, and that a lot of his politics and a lot of his actions seem to be just because he dislikes Nigel Farage and just because he dislikes Reform. I don't think that's a healthy sort of background to build a political party or a political movement on. I think many of the members and supporters of Advance UK should come home in a way and join back with Reform. Many of them are former Reform members, because I don't believe that Ben Habib can solve the huge issues that our country is facing.
Well, a lot of people follow Rupert Lowe. Rupert Lowe's massive still, and remains to be so. And a lot of people would probably look to him and think, right, I'm going to go Advance UK. If Farage thought, if we get Rupert and Ben back in the fold, do you think he'll ever do that? Because that really kind of solves that problem of the right being split even more than what it is now. Do you think he would at any point say, Ben, Rupert, I'm so sorry for what I've done, please come back?
Nigel's a really forgiving person.
Okay.
So I would never say never to that, but what I would say is the onus would be on Ben and Rupert to initiate that conversation, and I'm not sure that they would.
That's very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that's all our questions, Harrison. So
Yeah, I believe so.
So do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, I'll just wrap up. Well, thank you so much for coming. Obviously, we had an event back in November which was cancelled due to similar protests, but now, thankfully, we have the security, we have a proper venue as well. So I just want to thank the security for doing a really good job getting everyone in despite all the issues we had. So yeah, that's all I really have to say. If you guys want afterwards as well, we're going to head down to Bar 50 just for a few drinks, so if you fancy that, please come along.
I would say we won't be headed to Bar 50 because unless protesters might be watching this stream, so we will go somewhere else instead of Bar 50. But not Bar 50. But what I would say is thank you everyone for coming. I appreciate all the questions. I appreciate you all trekking out to come this evening, and I really appreciate it. And I hope you've all enjoyed. And thank you to people watching at home on the live stream. Thank you.